So good to be at King's Church again with you guys today. Always happy to be in New York City. Really love it. I live in Nashville, so I'm a country guy, and we have property in Nashville, but you guys have big buildings here. It's wonderful. And Pastor David is a dear friend of mine, and I watched you guys online as you did Church in the Wild. You got to give yourselves an applause for that. I mean, that was pretty incredible. Truly incredible. I was convicted after that I needed to do more street witnessing. I told Sincere I need to be preaching in the subway. And then yesterday we went into the subway and he said, "Here's your chance." I said, maybe the next time I go. If I keep hanging out with the King's Church people, it will just be a matter of time. I don't have that really great voice like Pastor David has, you know. My voice is, I've always said, Lord, couldn't I have more bass in my voice? But I'm stuck with the voice I got, so, I don't know if anyone wants to listen to a pipsqueak preach in the subway, but I'm sure God will use it. He can anoint it and he can use it. But thank you for coming today, because today is playoff Sunday if you're a football fan, right? I know New York's not really in anything in football now. The Jets, the Giants failed you guys, but it is playoff Sunday. And perhaps the most important thing you ought to know about me is that I am a Detroit Lions fan. And as a Detroit Lions fan, it has been a very rough go for us. For the last 39 years of my life, during football season, I've wondered if there is actually a God. I'm joking, but it's been painful. It's been a whole lot of suffering, because if you don't know, the Lions have been historically bad forever. The last playoff game that the Lions won was in 1991. I don't think they've had but 2 winning seasons that have made the playoffs 3 times since I've been alive. And every single year, Lions fans make the mistakes of saying, this is going to be the year. It's like going back to an ex that is going to dump you again. And by the 3rd week, we're always tweeting, same old Lions. Now this year, they're in the playoffs and they play tonight. So if they lose, you'll think of how much pain I am in this evening. But the bottom line is that as a Lions fan, I have gone through tremendous heartbreak and existential crisis. Usually I find myself asking the question, why was I born in Detroit? Why me? How come I can't have a football team to cheer for in January? And it's been this struggle that only other Detroiters can know. And to sum it up in one word, I'd say it's been bitter. And so I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 6 this morning. And I told the other service that we were going to go through the book of Revelation in a half hour. Does that sound possible? Maybe. Let's see if we can do it. The book of Revelation in a half hour. And I want to come from the standpoint of praying the bitter prayer. Praying the bitter prayer. Revelation 6, 9 to 11. It says this. We get to the 5th seal. The Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world, is opening up 7 seals. We're at seal number 5. We've seen 4 horses, 4 horse judgments. And I think this is going to surprise the reader what they see next. And it says, and when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness that they had borne. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, O sovereign Lord, holy and true. I want us to pause here for a second and notice what they say. They say what every Lions fan has been saying for a long time, and that is, how long? How long? How long before you will judge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth? And I think it's important for us to make this observation, that the bitter prayer, that the souls under the altar, which really represent you and I, and those people that follow the Lord faithfully, oftentimes will pray the bitter prayer And the bitter prayer begins with these two infamous words, and that is, how long? Now, this text is important because it's coming from Psalm chapter 13. Now, in the New Testament, we often find borrowed scriptures from the Old Testament. And not only are they borrowed, but they're taken and then they're repurposed. It's sort of like listening to a song today that was taken from something from the 70s, right? Rap and R&B does this. They take a song and then they repurpose that song. They put it into some remix, and it's an old song that's been made new and has new meaning behind it. And we find that with this text here, how long? Because if you were to do a study on it in the Old Testament, you would find it is the most bitter prayer that Israel would pray. It's found in Psalm chapter 13, I believe Psalm 39, Zechariah chapter 12. And when Israel was in its most bitter moments, it would pull out the how long prayer. Now, when I was a young man, my brother and I grew up at a time where we didn't have iTunes and we didn't have Spotify. The only way that we could get our music is we'd go to Sam Goody and we'd buy the whole album just because we liked one song on it. Do you remember those days? You'd have to spend $20 on a whole album, and the whole album was trash except for that one song. And then it would be like track number 4, and you'd play track number 4, and it's like, why'd you buy the whole album? And then something happened that changed the world. You guys remember that? About 1998, 99, Napster comes out. That changes the game. And then CD burners come out, and then we put Napster with CD burners, and we realized we could burn our own playlists, and that was the beginning of the end for the music industry. Right? And then you realize, if you just had a friend who needed friends, that you could convince him to spend his free time burning CDs for you. And we had a friend named Alex, and he would burn CDs for us, and because we didn't want to go to prison, he'd go to prison. We figured just burn the CD at his house, and if the feds track him, they'll show up at his door and be like, I'm innocent. I don't know. It had nothing to do with me. And he would burn all these albums, and I remember my brother convinced him to burn on this album, and it had all the great love ballads from the 90s on it. You remember Casey and JoJo? All My Life. Crazy, 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 all that stuff on it. My brother had this album with all of these Casey and JoJo songs on it, love ballads from the 80s, the whole deal. And we called it the Gold Album because it was on a gold CD. And my brother had, let's just say, a lot of relationships in high school, and he had a lot of heartbreaks in high school, and this man gave his all to love in high school. He didn't give it to grades, but he gave it to love. Okay? He may have flunked out of school, but he had a lot of girlfriends. And when he was going through it, he would pull the Gold Album out, and when we see the Gold Album, we used to say, leave him alone, he's going through right now because he's playing the Gold Album with all the heartache songs on it. Now's not the time to talk to him about anything he's going through, especially when old Cindy broke his heart, right? This is the Gold Album. Psalm 13 is the most bitter, heartbreaking prayer you can possibly pray. We find it on the lips of the faithful in Revelation chapter 6. And anybody hearing it thinks to themselves, oof. But understandably, we know why they pray it. Because they gave their all to God. And this is evidenced by the fact that those praying the prayer are those under the altar. Now, the altar is a place of sacrifice in the Old Testament. It's one of the closest places you can get to the presence of God. So the first observation we make is that those praying the most bitter prayers are the people that are closest to the presence of God. Those of us this morning who are saying, how long, O Lord, are the ones that have come to the intercessory prayer meetings, the ones that have preached on the streets of the most difficult city, perhaps in the United States, maybe even the world, the ones that have stayed up all night in prayer so that God would spare those he could in the city. They're the ones that have resisted temptation when nobody knows you've resisted temptation. They're the ones who have written checks that nobody knows about. They're the ones that have fed the hungry that nobody's aware of. They're the ones that have calloused their knees in prayer and have made no display of it on social media. These are the ones that have the bitter prayer in their mouths, the ones who have stained their pillows with tears. Not only that, it says that the souls under the altar were slain. We look over this word slain, but if you stop for a moment, the last time we met this word in the book of Revelation is in the 5th chapter when it says that the Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world. This word slain is very important. It's only reserved for the select few who have given their lives to follow Jesus. By saying that the souls under the altar were slain, what it's really saying is that they have suffered the same punishment that Jesus has suffered for taking up the same lifestyle to obey and follow the plan of the Father. So this combines and converges in this altar scene, and we find in the altar scene that those of us in the Christian life who are going to say, "How long, O Lord?" are not the wicked. Those of us who say, "How long, O Lord?" are the ones that are closest to the heart of God, or the ones that cry the most bitter tears. And we wonder in this moment, has God delayed his plan? And that's what it seems like to us, that God is delaying his plan. But I want to posit a thought to you this morning, and I'm going to keep saying this right here at this point. And that is what seems like delay from the human perspective. Because delay in the mind of a Hebrew wasn't just simply that God has forgotten, but in the mind of the Hebrew it was that God has refused to help. God has withheld his power. God is withholding his might. And the prayer of the faithful is, "God, will you use some of that godness about you? Yeah. You know, you're God. You can do it. You just don't like me? What's the deal?" When you pray the bitter prayer, you're saying, "God, will you please be God in my life?" Yeah. And what I'm going to posit to you this morning, I don't want you to forget this thought, that what seems like delay to every human being, they often call it withholding the presence of God, or they see it as the absence or the void of God in my life. But what we're about to see by the end of this sermon, hopefully, if I do this right, is that what delay actually is an interlude. The grace of God in your life. It's the time that God uses to accomplish and fulfill a purpose that is really invisible to you at this moment. And in that time, we worry that we're going to forget about all the details, or that God's going to forget all the details. But what I want you to see in just a second is God is the most meticulous being. I mean, he is so meticulous. I mean, didn't Jesus say that he has every single hair on your head numbered? And the older I get, the easier I find it's easy for God to do that, because he's subtracting. He's not adding. Let me say that to you. I realized that in the shower this morning. I said, God is subtracting. The number is going down. I'm going to have to find my way overseas and get some transplants, you know. Then the number will go up, and we'll be like, God's like, what are you doing to me here? Now, it's interesting that as we wait, God doesn't forget the details. He is absolutely 100% meticulous. And it doesn't seem that way when the saints get their answer. In Revelation 11, we're told that each of them, God responds, and he gives them a white robe, and he tells them to rest a little while. It says in verse 11, they were each given a white robe, and they were told to rest a little while longer. Now, this is really interesting, because the first thing he tells them to do is he tells them to wait. Now, I'm maybe the most impatient person. I probably belong here in New York City, to be honest with you. I am like a New Yorker when it comes to that. I mean, I live in Franklin, Tennessee, and I'm not from Tennessee. I'm from Detroit, as I just said. And those people in Tennessee, they are slow people. I've had a lot of unsanctified thoughts driving along the freeway. Had a lot of unsanctified emotions driving along the freeway. And I'll tell you, the hardest thing for me to do is to go to Subway, the actual sandwich place, and wait for them to make my sandwich. I mean, it is tough watching how slow they put everything together. And I mean, it's very impatient. I'm that guy that's like, come on, let's move this along. I got someplace to be. And the worst thing you can tell somebody is to wait. Be calm. I grew up in Detroit as an Italian. My last name is really Palmieri. And what I've known about being an Italian is the last thing you want to tell an Italian when they're angry is calm down. Right? Because when you tell an Italian to calm down, it's only going to make them more angry. You have a better chance of baptizing the cat than telling an Italian to calm down. Understand? Not going to happen. Just let them spew like a volcano. I remember once when I was about 4 years ago, I had to get LASIK surgery. And, when you're in pain, you don't want to wait. You want the pain to be immediately solved. And I was told that when you get LASIK, it's a painless procedure. But on my way home from the doctor, the pain went from a 1 to a 10 in just a 15-minute drive. And I'm thinking to myself, I should not have gotten that doctor off of Craigslist. I'm joking. I called the doctor and I said, Doc, I'm in a lot of pain right now. Like, what do I do? And I'm not kidding you. He says this to me. He goes, the Vicodin I gave you? I said, yeah. He goes, take that, and if you have any wine laying around the house, wash it down with that. And you're going to have to wait this out. And that'll help you. And you don't want to wait when you're in pain. Because you want the pain to be fixed this minute. So the souls under the altar, they're in pain, and they want God to act immediately. But here's something. Just because God doesn't give you the results immediately doesn't mean he's not acting. Just because there's no immediate results doesn't mean that God is not acting. And then, after telling them to wait, God gives to them a white robe. Now, I told the other service something revealing and transparent about myself, and that is I love Christmas time except for one thing, and that's giving gifts. Now, I'll give a gift because it's easy for me to give gifts, but I don't like to receive gifts. And the reason I don't like to receive gifts is because it's very awkward when somebody gives you something that you don't like. You guys know that feeling? I read somewhere where if you get a gift or you give somebody a gift and they pull it out of the bag and they say exactly what that gift is, they don't like it. Oh, it's a candle. Oh, lemon. That's exactly what I wanted. A eucalyptus candle. Oh, keychain from the Bahamas. Right? Oh, keychain from Vegas. Yeah, they don't like it. Because what do you do? And I'm a transparent person, so if I can't lie. It's hard for me to disguise my emotions. You know what I mean? I'd be the worst liar. I'm like, it's like when I go to the bridge to cross into Canada, because I used to live in Michigan, they'd ask me my name, and I'd fumble the question. What's your name? I don't know. And so I remember one year, somebody asked me, what do you want? I'm going to get you a nice gift. I said, I'm a sneakerhead. I love Nikes. I love Nike Air Maxes. That would be great. They're like $90 at the time. So I don't know where they got these Air Maxes from, but these were like, there's Foot Locker Air Maxes and there's Walmart Air Maxes. No, not Walmart, Kohl's. You get them at Kohl's. There's like Kohl's Nikes and then there's regular Nikes. And these were like a Kohl's pair of Nikes. And they were dad shoes. And you know that they were bad when my dad's like, I really like those shoes. You never wear them. I'll take them. Here you go, Dad. You can have these shoes. Knock your socks off, right? Literally. This is the white robe. Jesus, why are you giving me this? What am I'm in pain, God. And I want to remind you something. I'm in pain. I served you. I obeyed you. I gave my life for you. We went in the subways together. Preached on the streets. I wanted to be somewhere else, but I'm in New York City, God. Came to this city. I'm coming to this church. I could easily go to another church where I don't have to preach the gospel. I can easily do a whole lot of stuff. Okay, I could easily just blend into the culture, Lord, and do whatever, the culture is doing it, and just keep my mouth quiet and let this culture go to hell. But instead, I've decided to give testimony for you, and now I'm praying how long? And all you got for me is a white robe and telling me to wait. That's how we feel from the natural. And I think in the text, that's the way we're supposed to feel when we see it. But the white robe is not an insignificant gift. It's like when your grandma gives you something lame, but it has a scratch-off lottery ticket in it. You know what I mean? You didn't have my grandma, apparently. You're like, what is this? This is an old shirt. And inside there's like a scratch-off lottery ticket. My mom's like, why are you giving them a lottery ticket? They're 10 years old. What are you trying to teach them? It's a gift that's more valuable than meets the eye. Because we find out that white in Revelation has been the color of Jesus. The only ones that wear white, the ones that Jesus most intimately is aware of and knows. Those who wear white robes, he's telling you, I know who you are. I know exactly who you are. White also is an invitation to be an overcomer like Jesus. We see in the church in Sardis that they're the ones that wear robes of white. It's the color of Jesus, and it's the color of those that overcome. And when we see it meeting the idea of waiting, what we come to understand is that it's this idea, it's this imagery that those who wait are destined to overcome. So what the imagery is trying to tell us here is that you're praying how long? But Jesus is telling you, those who are praying the bitter prayer of how long, I know exactly who you are. And the time it takes for me to answer that prayer is the time it's going to take for me to work out what needs to be worked out so that you can be aware of the fact that I call you an overcomer. Go ahead, clap for Jesus this morning. And the rest of the narrative is simply showing how this is going to take place. Now, I've been talking a lot about Christmas this morning because I do love Christmas, and we just got through the Christmas season. And one of my favorite movies, perhaps my favorite movie in the Christmas holiday is Home Alone. Do you guys like this movie? Yeah. Right, Home Alone. Does anybody watch Home Alone when it's not Christmas? Nobody? We got one guy, he's like, I was watching it yesterday. I was watching it yesterday. Now, I think Home Alone 2 is great. Home Alone 1, I think, is a little bit better, but not by much, but it's great. And the most important, not most important, but one of the most important characters in that movie is a character we don't really actually realize is a character. Somebody in the last service actually guessed it right off the bat, and I'm like, wow, film major, NYU? Yeah. And that is the spider. Do you remember the spider? Yeah. We see it in Buzz's room. Quick shot. Then Kevin's shaving, and we see him like behind the toilet. And that tells us this spider is coming back somewhere at the end of this movie, right? And lo and behold, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Home Alone, if you've been under a rock for the last 40 years, the spider comes back, and that is what saves Kevin's life. And I think that the way that directors make their movies is they put little cues in there that let you know that despite all that's going on, this movie is proceeding exactly the way that it's supposed to. And in writing school, they tell you, make sure you bring every thought, make sure you bring every idea full circle. Don't leave it behind. Don't forget about it. Make sure you recall everything that you were talking about in the past. And bad writers forget about details and characters. Good writers remember everything. Point I'm trying to make is God remembers every detail about your life, and the book of Revelation is going to show you that by giving to you little details along the way that let you know that. And so the first scene that we see that's very important, after the prayers of the saints go up, after they pray this bitter prayer, and God says to them, I'm going to show you that you're an overcomer, and that this delay in your life is not the absence of God, but it's an interlude wherein the grace of God works on your behalf, whether you see it or you don't see it. That every detail in your life in that period of time is going to be accounted for, even if it moves from bad to worse. Sometimes when we pray, we expect it to go from worse to better, but many times it actually goes from worse to worser. But that doesn't mean that God's not working. Doesn't mean he's forgotten. That doesn't mean he's absent. You're the overcomer, and grace goes with you. Surely goodness and mercy follow you all the days of your life, and you will dwell in the house of God. First detail that we see, the first scene that we see is the startling scene that surrounds this prayer, and that is in Revelation 2, verse 10. We have the church of Smyrna. Now, this isn't the misbehaved church. You know, there was 2 churches among those 7 that needed a timeout. 2 churches that were definitely in the principal's office. You remember, were you one of those kids in school? You're always in the principal's office? Okay, that was Church of Laodicea. That was the church at Sincere. It's like, yep, I was in the principal's office yesterday. But this was the goody two-shoes church. This was the church that obeyed. And look at what Jesus tells them in chapter 2, verse 10. He tells that church, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Someone say, ugh. Okay, now we talked about the spider. This is going to be a spider now. A detail you should not forget. He says, the devil. Remember that. It's the first time he shows up in the story. The devil is going to throw. This word throw doesn't mean gently place. This means to throw with force. It means to send something through the air with force. The devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested for 10 days. I want you to remember devil. I want you to remember the word throw. I want you to remember the word prison. And I want you to remember 10, and I want you to remember days. Don't forget those details. They're details regarding the life of the church in Smyrna. And Jesus is aware of this. I know exactly who's persecuting you. I know that there's spiritual warfare going on. I know that in the process of being obedient, that you have this cosmic enemy, and I know that it looks like he's getting away with it. How often does it feel that way? When you're serving God, there's an attack on your children. I can't tell you how many, when I pastored for 6.5 years, how many parents would come to me. They're faithful members. They stay up at night and pray for their children. And what continues to break their heart is to see the rebellion of their child make poor decisions and then suffer the consequences of their decisions. And it seems like they say, is God even listening to my prayers? And I want to let you know, God knows your child's name. God knows where they were last night. God knows the trauma. God knows about the wounds that refuse to heal in their heart. God knows exactly how to heal them. And even today, if your heart is breaking over them, God knows what the devil has done to them. God knows the prison that they're in. God knows how long they've been in that prison. God is keeping track of that record. Please know that today. You say, how long, God? But remember, the grace of God is at work in this interlude of your life. Then we move to something and it gets worse. We get to chapter 11, we're like, where is God? Then we see the 2 witnesses, and it doesn't matter who they are in this sermon. We're not trying to identify them. But what we know is that whatever they do, what matters is that they preach the word of God boldly. They're in the subways preaching. They're in the West Village preaching. Where else did you guys preach? They're in Central Park. They're in Battery Park. There's a person, they're there preaching the gospel. They're made fun of, they're mocked, they're ridiculed, they're trolled on social media. And we find that they're left in the street to die. It says in chapter 11, verse 7, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit, he will make war on them, he'll conquer them, and he'll kill them. And it says, and their dead bodies lay in the street of that great city. Now, in the Old Testament, even if you were a criminal, you had to be buried. Because there was a dignity in Hebrew law that a dead person must be buried regardless of how they live their lives. And the very fact that we see in verse number 8 that those in the city refused to let them be put in a tomb shows the violence and shamefulness of their death. The servants of God. Oftentimes, we serve God and we think that reward is right around the corner when what actually is around the corner is shame. Can I ask you an honest question this morning? How many have ever obeyed God and sensed embarrassment that came with that? How many have ever gone to a family reunion and felt embarrassment for serving God? How many have got around your families this holidays and the righteous felt embarrassed? The righteous felt shamed. Have gone into a place as a Christian and know that you didn't belong there because they didn't want you there. And here they are, and they're shamed. And not only are they shamed, they're killed. They're left to die. And so the street, I want you to remember the street. Because the street is another spider. It's a detail. The way that God said to them, look it. I know it's the devil. And I know all about that prison that he's going to put you in. And I know that you're in there 10 days of your life. I also know about this road, this infamous road that you died on. I mean, think about it. When something, if you had gotten mugged on a road, you probably would not be fond of that road. Am I right about that? There was in 2016, I got in a car accident on 23 South in Toledo, Ohio. A truck hit me from behind, almost ended my life. I mean, it came close for me. And I still passed that road, and when I pass it, I'm praying the Holy Ghost or something, because I'm not fond of 23 South. Think about the feeling that you have when it's a place where you suffered. God, what are you doing about this? Now, chapter 8, we have one more scene. After all this is taking place, what surrounds the narrative is that the saints pray again, just like you and I would pray when something went from bad to worse, or. This kind of reminds me of when you have a bad airline experience, right? The saints pray, and it says that their prayers go up to God like smoke. When you have a bad airline experience, nothing is more frustrating. And when you're angry at the airlines, you tweet at them, don't you? How many have ever tweeted at American Airlines? How many have ever tweeted at Delta? I think it's funny sometimes, some of the more notable people that I follow, political leaders, whoever, they're talking about politics, and then you get this one angry tweet that's like, hey, at Delta. Thanks for not honoring my ticket, Delta. Hey, at American, blah, blah, blah. And then they give the computer-generated response, Enjoy a beverage, free on us. The other day I had to go on an hour flight, and then I'm on the way to the airport, and you know the feeling. You're on the way to the airport, and you get an email from the airline, right? You know exactly what that email is going to tell you. 15-minute delay, gates changed. This said 15-minute delay, and then I get to the airport, and they say, it's going to be longer. We don't have a pilot. It's like, well, can anyone else fly this plane? And then the pilot shows up, but now they don't have a crew. Then the crew shows up, and then bad weather moved in, and we sat on the tarmac because there was a lightning and there was a ground hold. Then we finally get up in the air, and then we land, and then they're like, you know what? We don't have somebody for the jet bridge. This isn't our fault. This is the airport's fault, right? And so by that time, I'd gotten on Twitter, and that was it. Hey, at American Airlines, blah, 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 blah. That's what you do when you're frustrated and you've had to wait and things are going from worse to worse to worse. And that is, the saints are now saying, God, listen, this has gotten bad. And they tweet at God their frustrations because they want to know, God, are you aware of the street? You aware of the street we died on, God? You aware of that? That street you told us to go preach at? That street we were proclaiming your name? You aware of the prison we were in, God? And this complaint goes up like smoke, as though it's incense. How long until you do something about this? And then something takes place at the end of the movie. Can you look at a few more scriptures with me before we close? Something takes place as the movie draws to a close. Revelation chapter 18. Let's go there. The first scene is the destruction of Babylon. Babylon represents the enemies of the people of God. It represents the city that persecutes the righteous. It represents the city that is against the prophets of God. And in Revelation 18, the city is destroyed. And in describing the destruction of the city, it says this, and the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with Babylon will weep and wail. Now pay attention. When they see the smoke of her burning ascend. It's very important because the only other time we see that smoke is being used in the narrative is when the prayers of the saints rise up before God. The spider, that detail has now come full circle to tell us and make a connection that it was the prayers of the saints that are associated with Babylon's destruction. That the destruction of Babylon is actually God's response to the prayers of the saints that went up before God. And this tells us as readers that God has been paying attention. He has heard the prayers of the saints. He has not forgotten. He has not misheard. He has not been absent, and he has been there the whole time. And the smoke paints an imagery or a picture for us to let us know that this story has been moving forward in the direction, the way that it was supposed to go from the beginning, and that divine providence has been guiding this the whole entire time. Listen, every single detail of your life is accounted for. Every single detail in this church is accounted for. The entire history, every faithful act, every prayer, every cry has gone up before the Lord like smoke, and he knows and he has heard it. But that's not all. If you call before an hour, there's more for you. The next thing that we see in chapter 20. Chapter 20, verse number 2. Now God is acting. And it says that after he brings down Babylon in the story, it says he seizes the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan. He uses all four names, but notice who shows back up in the narrative. Who comes back into the story? The Greek says, ho diabolos, the devil. The definite article in the Greek is present here. It doesn't mean an accuser, some accuser, a random accuser. Ho diabolos means the exact accuser, the devil. And suddenly the minds of the listener would go all the way back to Smyrna and remember, isn't he the guy? Isn't he the guy that threw the righteous into prison? He's that guy, isn't he? That's the devil. He's the ones that they were praying about. Well, what happens to him? It says he's bound for 1,000 years. And they threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it. Wait a second. Things come full circle, don't they? The devil cast them into prison for 10 days, but now the devil, the accuser, he is cast by God, not into a prison, but into abyss, the place that is more darker, far deeper, way worse than a prison. And it's not for 10 days, it is for 1,000 years. What are we supposed to know about that? The punishment that Satan inflicted on the people of God comes back to him far worse. Why is that possible? Because God's been present the whole time. Because God has been keeping track of every single detail. One thing about me is that I'm not a very artistic person, but I am very measured and I am very meticulous. Precise. I'm working on the bibliography page of a dissertation thesis that I've been doing for 6 years right now, 426 sources, and I didn't do my bibliography page to the end. Over Christmas break, every day consisted of me looking at Turabian and making sure in that bib page, I'm talking about 426 entries, okay, and over 2,000 footnotes that I had to pull those from, making sure that every comma was where it's supposed to go, making sure that every period was where it's supposed to go, making sure every of the hundreds of journal articles that I cited, every single one was abbreviated exactly correctly. Listen, this is mind-numbing work. Talk about needing to shrink. And it reminded me of the fact that this is what God is like with the details of his people. He knows every comma. He knows where every comma goes. He knows where every period goes. Nothing is misplaced in that record of your life. And the final evidence that we get of that is we come to chapter 21, and we get to the new heavens and the new earth. And in the new heavens and the new earth, we get this picture of the new Jerusalem. And one of the most glorious, marvelous scenes of the text is when we find out that when the saints come to the gates, they learn that the gates are made up of 12 pearls, each made up of a single pearl, and the street of the city is paved in gold. This is that spider that comes back. You remember the street? The street you got mugged on? The street that the beast overcame the people of God on? You guys remember that street? Where they were killed, and they were left to die, and they were shamed? That street where they said, hey, God, don't you see what's going on? Your people were just shamed. The next occurrence that we see of the street, it's no longer a street of shame. It is a street that is made of gold, which represents the fact that now those who have prayed the bitter prayer because they felt that God was absent, God lets them know, I watched what they did to you. I watched the beast rise up against you. I was there when they all cheered your death. I was there when they spit on your bodies and burned you. I took knowledge of the fact that you died the death, and that your death was similar to the death of Jesus in the sense of its shame. I saw you following him. I saw every bitter emotion that you went through, and I kept record of it. And every prayer that you prayed, every complaint that you made, when it seemed like delay, I was there, working all things out for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Listen, there's a lot of end-time conjecture, alarmism that takes place, all kinds of foolishness that we see that goes on YouTube. But if you can hear anything that I say today, the book of Revelation is not about some roadmap to doomsday. It is a call to you, the faithful, to remind you that in your frustration and in the persecutions and sufferings of life that comes from following Jesus, and in the prayers that you pray that seem to go unanswered, to remember that delay is not the absence of God. Delay is the interlude of the grace of God in your life where he is working on your behalf so that you become the conqueror that he says that you are. He has every single prayer that you have prayed kept on record. He has measured every single detail, and the text and the narrative makes us certain that he is going to fulfill his word to you, answer every prayer, and give to you the reward that the people of God have been promised. When this thing is over, you will not be heartbroken. You will rejoice and you will be glad in the God of your salvation. He's counted your tears. I pray today that in this, as you leave this place, as you go on with your day, as we close service here in just a second, that when you say how long, you don't look at it from the perspective of where are you, God? When you say how long, I pray that you pray it from the standpoint of, I know God is gracious and graciously working to bring all things to fruition in my life. Friend, as you leave, may his presence go with you to remind you that he is near and mindful of those who serve him. Let's stand to our feet this morning.